Hello, amigos. It's Celeste Leon, and welcome back to the Light to Success podcast, a place where we can discuss how to strengthen our mindset, increase our confidence, and maintain a high level of motivation to reach the next level of success in our lives. So, let's get started. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Light to Success podcast. This is your host, Celeste Leon, and I am really excited to introduce you to a great friend and someone who actually really helped me in starting this podcast, who is an inspiration and a guy that I could go to. His name is Matt LeBris. He is an entrepreneur, founder of 1B Branding, a New York City-based branding agency, and the host of a top-ranked podcast called The Coding Success. He's been doing it for a long time, and I believe, Matt, you have over 300 episodes now.
Yes, we do. We do.
Yeah,
300
amazing.
Yeah.
So amazing. His goal is to impact 1 billion lives, and he is a beacon of light through his work on social media and wherever he goes. I met Matt at a networking event, I believe, many years ago in New York City. We had some friends in common and we've just stayed connected. So thank you, Matt, for being here today.
Oh, I need to be the one thanking you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited and I love seeing what you're doing with your show. And just the fact that we're here, I'm super, super grateful. So I'm excited for this.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Matt, I want us to dive into all things podcasting. Now that I have a podcast, people are coming up to me more and more, asking questions about Celeste. How did you do it? What does it take? I'm scared to do it because I feel like people don't want to listen to me. What are your top tips? And I know before I started, I had the same fears. I thought about how do I actually execute? Are there benefits in doing it, or is the market too saturated? So if you're listening and you really want to know all about this, this is the podcast episode for you. And so let's dive in, Matt. You've been now, I believe your podcast now, is it 5 years that you've been doing it for?
5 years. Yes, that is correct.
5 years. So that's a long time because most podcasts stop after like a few episodes. Most people give up once they realize how much work it takes and the commitment. So tell me about your journey. How did you start your podcast? And tell me about it.
Yeah, 100%. So I started my podcast back in 2018, and I say this jokingly, but it's very truthful. At the time, I really had nothing else going on in my life. I just had departed from a job with Damon John of Shark Tank. I was spearheading Damon's content initiatives from social to courses to books to podcasts, everything in between. And I learned a lot about content in my 3+ years of working with him. And at a certain point, I just said to myself, you know what, dude, like you're in proximity of an individual that's on national television, speaking all around the world, like doing all of these cool things. Like you see that it's possible, go and do it for yourself. So very egotistically, I had left that job. But like I said, I really had no plan. And with that being said, I had an intern at the time who became a coworker, and he's still a very good friend of mine. His name is also Matt. And Matt all the time would be like, Matt, you need to start a podcast. I'm like, dude, when the hell do I have time to start a podcast? Like, I am working full time with you Monday through Friday, and I'm even in the office on Saturdays. Like, when do I have the time to do this? And when I had left my job, that was the first thing I thought of because it was the easiest thing for me to do because I had the time to do it. And that was actually the inception of Decoding Success. It launched in December of 2018. I think it was December 4th of 2018 when we put out our first episode. It's been 5 years. It's been an absolutely incredible journey. But if I told you it was anything other than what I just said, it would be a lie. The truth of the matter is I started the show because I really didn't have a plan of what I was going to do with my life at that point.
So did you start it then as a way to figure out which path you wanted to take? Because I think one of the amazing things about having your podcast is that you get to speak to people perhaps who would never give you an opportunity. So did you already view it like that, or why a podcast out of everything that you could have done?
Yeah. I wish I did view it that way because you're 100% spot on. Having a podcast gives you direct mentorship from individuals that you might not be able to talk to without the microphone, without the camera, right? It gives you the opportunity to really connect with people you might look up with, or people that might be able to support your business or buy from you or give you leads or any way to level up in life. I did not view it like that. In fact, I probably was just so lost in the sauce at that point in my life that it wasn't even a thought. But I chose a podcast merely because the idea was planted in my mind. And I know that you're a spiritual individual, so I don't mind sharing this. Like, I feel like I was divinely guided to find my show, and to start to develop it. And obviously, it's evolved over the course of those 5 years. But I really do think that we have to, as human beings, try different things to realize what it is that we like in life. Like, you can't go into a restaurant and imagine just going into the restaurant and ordering the same thing all the time. Like, how do you know you like chicken parmesan? You have to try chicken parmesan to know you like it. And I didn't know that I would like podcasting until I tried it, and I'm really grateful that that idea was planted in my mind. And whether that was God or whether that was just my buddy Matt, it led me here, and it's become honestly like such a godsend because, like you said, it really is mentorship, which is like, I always jokingly say it's selfish to view it that way, but it is. And then furthermore, it's impact. Like, the amount of people, I get messages all the time, and I'm so grateful for when someone reaches out and they're like, "Hey, I listened to your show," and I'm like, "Wow, like, never would have thought you would have listened to this, but awesome." So
Yeah.
I wish I was thinking like you, Celeste, but no, I wasn't thinking that way.
Well, no, thank you for sharing that. And honesty is awesome. And so, Matt, now that you've done this for 5 years, what do you think have been the biggest benefits that you have um, taken from having this podcast?
Yeah, I think number one is making the impact, right? That comes first and foremost to my mind. Like, just knowing that you can change someone's life, or you could plant a seed in their mind, or you can guide them to whatever it is that you are setting out to podcast on. I think that's probably number one. Number two is just like the ability to communicate more effectively, like to be able to have conversations like this, to be able to connect with humans on a deeper level, to be able to empathize with people through, a lot of people empathize through comparison. Like, if you're like, "Hey, I've been through a breakup," I could sit here and say, "Yeah, I have too." But I've learned to now empathize through emotion versus experience, where I know that that breakup
Mm,
caused you pain. I personally understand what pain is for me too. So now I can empathize with you on a new level. So it's unlocked, while I said communication is the second part, it's just unlocked deeper connection from a human to human perspective. And yeah, I mean, thirdly, again, selfishly, like, I've learned so much. It's forced me to learn more. It's forced me to broaden my horizons. You and I, Celeste, could be walking down the street right now, and we can see a pit bull, and you run to that pit bull, and I run the opposite way. And that's because of our conditioning, our programming, our life's experiences. So having a podcast, while I don't agree with everything that's shared on my show, while I don't agree with, every little take that's provided, you have to respect it. So it's allowed me to find a new respect and broaden my horizons to realize that my little paradigm of this world, my very, very tiny paradigm, my little cube of what we live in right now, like, it's not the only thing. It's not the only way. So I would say those are the top three without a doubt. And it's been a beautiful, beautiful experience to move through that, because I can only imagine if I was still stuck in my own ways.
I absolutely love that, Matt. I couldn't agree more with your benefits. I think that especially because both you and I are in the personal development space. So the conversations we're having are very meaningful, even though other people can have podcasts on there's so many topics, right? And things that people can talk about, but that is so beautiful. I love how focused you are on impact in your purpose and giving value to others through what you're doing. So for those listening, right, if this is something that you want to do, you want to create your own platform and have this type of impact with others, you will 1000% have it. And I think, Matt, sometimes people worry about, right, they may look at you, or even me, even though I'm not that big, and say, look at you guys, you already have so many people listening to you. You have such a big brand. No one's going to listen to me. Why are people going to care? I'm sure, Matt, your first or second or third episode didn't have the amount of listeners that you have now. So for those people who are scared about not being big enough to start, or that they don't have already like a big audience, do you think it's still worth for them to start, or what is your advice to them?
Absolutely. The podcast industry is really just starting. I know that it's been around for 10 plus years, maybe even 15 plus years at this point. But what we're seeing now in this space is just exponential growth. So, yes, planting a tree 15 years ago would have been better. You would have a fully blossomed tree at this point. But the next best time to plant the seeds is literally right now in this moment. You can't you can't get to the top of the ladder without first stepping on the bottom. You can't run without crawling. I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
anyone should be comparing themselves to someone that is 5 years into the journey, or Celeste, however long you're in it, a year, etc. We
Agreed.
shouldn't be comparing someone that's on a different chapter than where we are. And it's very easy to do that, but just know that there's enough market share. There's enough people. Just keep in mind, there are 8 billion people in this world. There will be people that will listen to your show. Will it be a million people out of the gate? Probably not. Will it be 1,000 out of the gate? Probably not, depending on your audience size. But even if it's 5 people, I think we need to shift out of the belief system that we need to achieve massive success right away and be some unicorn, and really just start to get out of our own way to put that foot forward. And if you're interested in doing something, great. And if you try it and it doesn't work out, great. That's just one less thing that you're going to do in the future, or maybe it's something that you need to do in the future, right? Like, we need to take action to be able to truly identify so much in life, including if you should start a podcast, if you should do it right now, if you should do it in 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. But please just know that the industry is really just getting started, and what's to come is a beautiful thing. So the door is open. Join us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful words of empowerment. I hope people are listening to that. And even for myself, I would say, Matt, I started talking to you. Remember when I first reached out, hey, I want to start a podcast, probably 9 months before I actually launched, right?
Right.
So I waited a while for me to actually make it happen. It had been brewing in my mind for probably a few years before I even really took action on launching and recording and getting the equipment, because it can be a little bit paralyzing when you're thinking about all the things that encompass podcasting. But I really, something that I kept telling myself, that you gave me this advice, everybody gave me this advice, is no one starts an expert.
Mm,
And I think we look at everybody else with the top quality, with top production. They probably already have a team, but you cannot compare to yourself to someone who has a team of 5 people working on their podcast when you're starting as a solo podcaster entrepreneur. Thankfully, today we have so many amazing tools to help us start. But again, I think just starting with what you have and improving along the way is key.
100%.
And Matt, so what would you say then that are, if you could think about 5 pillars when you are taking podcasting seriously, right? Now let's think more about like the podcasting business. What are the 5 pillars to have a successful podcast? Because it's not just about record and post,
Yeah.
right? There's way more that it takes to marketing and sharing the message and all of that.
Yeah, I think number one is firstly knowing what your intention is, right? Like, we need to take deliberate action, but we need to take that with intention. So, why are you podcasting? Are you getting into podcasting to become a gazillionaire, or are you getting into podcasting to have fun? Are you getting into podcasting to have conversations like this? Like, truly tune into yourself and understand what your intention is for doing so. Number two would be know who you're speaking to. Too many people get into podcasting, including myself. I did this. We get into podcasting thinking that we're going to speak to the whole world. but I just want to let everyone know Amazon didn't start by selling everything. Amazon started by selling books. Gary Vee didn't start by talking about entrepreneurship and content and this and that. He started by talking about wine. Brene Brown didn't start by talking about all of the other topics that she's currently talking about. She started by talking about shame. Dave Ramsey didn't
Yes.
start talking about finances as a whole. He started by talking about debt, right? So we need to understand who we're talking to. That is absolute key. And then we need to understand what we're talking about, right? We need to identify from a third pillar perspective, we need to identify what the problem is we're solving for other people. What is the problem of your core target audience? And your podcast needs to revolve around that. It's very easy to want to solve the problem of 8 billion people, but to get to 8 billion people, you first have to start with 8. You first have to start with 1. Then you have to expand to 80, then 800, then 8,000, then 80,000, and build up from there. It's so easy to want to aim for 800,000 before we even get to 8. And that's actually hustling backwards, and it's delaying your impact. It's delaying your opportunity to break through the wall. So we have to make sure that we get crystal clear on intention, who our audience is, what their problem is, how we're solving that problem. What is our unique way for doing so? And then furthermore, there's other operational stuff that I could rant on for days, but I honestly think it's those 4 pillars that matter most: intention, who we're speaking to, the problem, etc., and getting really crystal clear on that to really help us break through the wall to get to the place where our show becomes known. Because without hyper attention and focus, we'll have the opposite, which is deliberate intention or focus, and we don't get anywhere with deliberate intention or focus. We'll just
Mm-hmm.
continue to bounce off the wall, and we don't want to bounce off a wall, right? Like, that's not what we
Yeah.
want. We want to be able to move forward with our show and have the best possible show. So I think those are truly the pillars. If I were to go back, that's what I would do, and I'll tell you firsthand, that's not what I did when I started my show. So everyone that's listening is in a much better place than I am.
Love that. No, those are great, great tips and something to think about even before launching. So that's crystal clear. And that will also help you on the guests that you bring on based on that. Awesome. Awesome. So, how has podcasting helped you achieve your career goals? Because initially, you mentioned when you first started the podcast, you didn't really have a clear direction of where you wanted to go. But I'm sure that today you do have a clear direction and you have a
Yeah.
successful business. So, how has podcasting accelerated your career?
Well, I think what I've realized over 5 years of podcasting is that I want my podcast to be my career, right? So it brought me from a place 5 years ago of not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, ultimately to a place of realizing that I had left a really great job too early based on, egotistical behavior and things of that sort, to now realizing, like, hey, I could really make something out of this podcast, and I could really make an impact with it, and as well as an impact, make an income. So I think that was essentially the real pivot for me, was just, realizing, like, hey, this could be something that I make a living out of. And if that is like the absolute dream, and I know it's everyone's dream to an extent, that podcast, but it's like, I can have conversations that make an impact with one another or on other people, and make a living from that. Like, just think, like that really lights me up. Like, to think on a grand scale of things, and seeing how that's evolved and developed, like moving the podcast into a studio, then potentially moving it into a studio full time and building out an office and a team, etc. Like, that is a really beautiful vision for myself. And yeah, like, in short, it's like the podcast taught me, like, hey, this could be your career. And that still amps me up. That's why I wake up every morning.
I love that. That is beautiful, Matt. So, what are some ways that people can monetize their podcast for those who genuinely want to, in the long term, make it a career?
Yeah, I think ultimately a lot of people get into podcasting thinking that the number one way to monetize your podcast is through ads. And yes, to an extent, that's true. But it's not the number one way to monetize a podcast. In fact, you're only going to monetize your podcast via ads if you have a certain amount of downloads per month. And truth be told, even if you have that certain amount of downloads per month and you're just passing by on the threshold of getting paid from ads or brand deals, ultimately, in full transparency, you're not going to be making a living off of that. The number one way to make money from podcasting is by creating some form of course and or some form of membership community based around your show. That is the number one way to monetize your show. It is the first way to start to monetize any brand is by providing a service. Services are always the number one way to monetize a personal brand because you are trading your time for money, whether that be coaching, whether that be group coaching, whether that be a mastermind, whether that be a community, whether that be a course. Those are the number one ways to monetize a podcast. Of course, after that, you do have affiliates, you do have ads, you do have brand deals, you could do live events, you can do merchandise. These are all ways for you to make money from your podcast, but I like to debunk the myth of ads being the number one way to do so. Ads are a realistic thing to shoot for when you have a massive podcast. And it's not to say that a smaller podcast can't get ads. I've gotten ads before, but I'll tell you what, they barely paid my car payment, right? Like we need to make sure that we're monetizing in other ways. And ultimately, it comes down to those pillars I talked about. You want to accelerate your growth and get to a place where you can make a lot of money. It's really knowing who you're talking to. Brands that approach you are going to want to know who your audience is. Deals of that sort, they're going to want to know who your audience is. They're going to want to know what you talk about. They're going to want to know what you interview on or what you solo rant on. So again, that's why those 4 pillars are so important. But yeah, there's so many ways to make money. It's just there's a bit of a myth or a bit of like a gray, foggy area for those on the outside looking in, thinking like, hey, ads is the number one way. Truth be told, it's not.
Yeah, thank you for debunking that. That's such a great point. And to also keep that open mind of that there's so many other ways to make money
Yeah.
from having a podcast. But I think that most of us initially when we start this podcast, right, that's not necessarily the top motivators to make money.
Mhm.
We're really doing it for the purpose and the impact. And the fact that we can then monetize that is just like, I think, the most incredible thing,
Yeah.
right? So I love that. Now, let's get a little bit more real with people, right? We're talking about the benefits, the highlights, the great things. What are there any negatives, or do you think are what's the hardest part about having a podcast?
Ooh, the hardest part about having a podcast. I mean, I think it's a few things. Like, number one, there's sacrifice. Like you have to sacrifice your time. And unless you could wire your brain, your mind, your thoughts to see the reward and impact versus income, you might feel like you're wasting your time. It is also, secondly, a very time consuming thing. Unless you have a team, unless you're outsourcing your editing, unless you're outsourcing your content production, it is a very time consuming task. So I think those are the first 2 that come to mind. I think, the amount of time that goes into a podcast is definitely underplayed. Whether
Yes.
you're doing interviews like this, so Celeste, this is going to take an hour of your time. Furthermore, if you're editing this episode, this will probably take an additional hour and or more. So let's say we're already at 2.5 hours. If you're creating video content, okay, cool. Let's say that's another 30 minutes. You're at 3 hours. Okay, it's almost a full-time job. You're at half a day right now, and you're not even promoting it yet. So there's so many,
That's
and of
right.
course, depending on your level of skill in regards to doing your own production, I think people overlook that. So I think those are potentially, I don't want to say negatives, but things that are just overlooked and can be a burden on new podcasters that aren't necessarily fully thinking that through. On the flip side, a lot of people, what they do is they delegate all of those editing tasks and all of those video content production tasks. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, how did I just spend $4,000 this month on X, Y, and Z? Because it does become expensive. So that could be a totally different thing, from a financial perspective. From that financial perspective, it could definitely be a burden as well. Again, I don't necessarily know if they're negatives. I just feel like there are things that people don't fully think through. I definitely didn't think through them. I didn't even think about them, right? It was
Yep.
just like, I'm just going to do this. So people are, like I said, people are in a better position listening to this episode because it really puts things into perspective. But again, I don't think those are negatives. It's just like, hey, let's put this out there for the people tuned into this
Yes.
to really think through, you know?
Yep, absolutely. And I definitely agree. It's definitely time consuming,
Yeah.
right? And to be transparent, I have a VA that helps me with my editing. So
Yeah.
I do not edit this. She helps me with that, and she does help me create some of my social media content. I post it and I write my captions, but that saves me a lot of time because I started the podcast while working full time. I still work full time. So for those who are in a similar position, you can do it. Whether you have a job or not, it can be done. But again, it is a cost that initially you do need to think about. And how about you, Matt? Do you have a team at this point that helps you, or are you solo?
Yeah. No, I definitely have a team. And, you know, I want to add to the last question you asked. I think one of the difficult things or one of the negative things is how much a podcast or how much being a part of any project really exposes about yourself, right? Because you just made me think about it. I think a podcast or a project in general is really like a mirror,
Mm,
as are relationships and connections and things of that sort. Meaning, like, my podcast made me realize that I was stuck in my own ways. It made me realize that I thought I knew more than I know. It made me
mm,
realize that I have a hard time delegating, which is why I'm bringing this up. You're talking about delegating. So it
yeah.
exposes you. And if you're not ready for that exposure to yourself, you might look negatively at a podcast or any project. So I definitely wanted to touch on that. But to get back to your current question, yes, I do have a team. I highly suggest individuals check out onlinejobs.ph, which are
Hmm.
Filipino based workers. You can find some really great quality people to help you with your show at a significantly cheaper cost. That's an action item. I like to provide action items for people to check out, because if I just sit here and tell you I have a team without telling you where I got my team, you're gonna be like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, like, where do I get my team? You know,
Yes.
Upwork, Fiverr, freelancer.com. Like, there's so many. Personally, I have no stake in onlinejobs.ph, but it's a resource that was shared with me years ago. And I was very, very hesitant to move forward with individuals on the site because they're abroad, and because, you know, there would be essentially a lack of control for me to make sure that they're getting the work done on time. But that's why you need to make sure that you have systems in place and things of that sort. And then ultimately, it really does take a lot of the weight off of your shoulders. You don't have to worry about the video editing. You don't have to worry about the audio editing.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about the scheduling and that type of stuff. There are aspects of podcasting that I do still control, but I control them by design. I control them because I like to oversee those particular areas. So, for example, all of my personal outreach to my guests is done by me, because I'm the one that has the relationship
Hmm.
with the guest. I don't want
Yep.
to outsource that and have someone speak on my behalf, because that's very impersonal. And I think a podcast is a very personal thing. It's a conversation, it's a back and forth. And I don't want to lose that aspect of it just because I'm reaching out via email. So things like that, I make sure that I still have my hands in, but ultimately I have a team for the sake of, you know, managing business, managing time, managing work, etc.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for the transparency, for that tip. I remember you also shared that website with me. My first VA I got from that website.
Oh, cool.
And now I have a second VA that I'm working with, and she was a referral. And
Awesome.
shout out to Ibiza. Love you, girl. Thank you for helping me with this amazing podcast. Um, well, awesome, Matt. This is such a great combo. I think the last thing I want to ask you today is about what success means to you now.
Mm.
Our definition of success, I think probably 5 years ago when you first started the podcast, is different from today. So for 2024, what does success look like to you?
Success to me now is, whew, this is such a good question. And I mean, I should be prepared for questions like this at this point, but I never am. To me, I was recently defining success as embracing B to Y, meaning A is the starting point in our life, right? Or A is the starting point of you starting a podcast or whatever it is. Like, all right, cool. We get the starting point. We oftentimes embrace the starting point and we embrace the finish line, Z.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens to the in between? Like, I can't say that I love that all the time. In fact, I everyone always talks about loving the journey. I can't tell you that I love the journey. Like, I can't sit here and honestly say that. And I think that is success to me, like aiming for that, because that's where the fulfillment is. That's where the emotions are. That's where the ebbs and that's where life is, right? The reason being is because when you're at A, when you're starting something, it's not necessarily a negative. Like, you don't feel low emotions in the very early stage. Like, you're excited, you're motivated, you're driven, you're this, you're that. Like, that's up, 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 up. And then Z, the end of that project, whenever you see that project through to its final day, or a sale of a business or a startup or whatever, Z is very high too. Like, Z is an accomplished feeling. It's like up, 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 but it's like B to Y, where you're really like on the wave, like you're riding the up and the down. And to me, that's what success is being able to surf the waves of life. Like, becoming a better surfer while surfing too, nonetheless, because you can't get off the surfboard. Like, you always have to be on the surfboard. So metaphorically, success to me is becoming a better surfer. And by the way, I've never surfed in my life, but metaphorically, it's becoming a better surfer. And then, humanly, it's like understanding or learning how to ride the waves of life.
I love that. I love how you broke that down and you explained that. That's beautiful, Matt. And I think I love it. The way you live your life also, to me, is just you embrace what you're doing. You live purposely. You're doing things to really make an impact, and your mission of impacting, right, 1 billion people all encompasses that. So thank you for your work. You're an inspiration to so many people, including me. I loved having you on this podcast. And lastly, for those, again, who are trying to start a podcast, something that helped me a lot before I launched was talking to people like Matt, people that had already done it. So I could put myself in their shoes and say, they've done it. How can I do it too? Sometimes when we look at people from so far away, we think that, oh, they knew everything, they have it all together, they have all the resources in the world. But that's not always true, right? You can do it too. You can do it. Surround yourself with the right people. Ask questions. I'm sure, Matt, you're open for anybody sliding into your DMs or sending you a message. And likewise with me, find those communities. Do you have any other community, Matt, that you suggest for people to learn?
No, I think just listening to podcasts like this, right? I mean, ultimately, there's so much information out there, but we really do need to do our due diligence in ensuring that we know who we're listening to and making sure that we align with that person. We want to find people to listen to that have, like you said, Celeste, like been in our shoes. Maybe it's, you need to find forms of ways to resonate, and there's so many out there, but just simply listening to a podcast like this is definitely something that I suggest, and it goes a long way. And I'm telling you, once again, you'll be doing more due diligence than I did when I started my podcast, because I didn't listen to anything or watch anything. I just did. So everyone is way ahead of me when I was starting, and I put that out there.
Amazing, Matt. Any last words for our audience today?
I just want to take a moment to express gratitude to you for, doing what you're doing in this world. Obviously, with this show and beyond, like, you're making an impact, and I hope that you see that and you know that. It's going to be ever growing without a doubt. I know that you're going to be consistent with it as you are already. Just keep chugging along. I'm obviously here to support and root you on. And lastly, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. This was awesome.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. That means a lot. Thank you for being here today, and until next time, my friends. You have just finished listening to this episode, and I hope you're feeling inspired, enlightened, and ready to take the next step to accomplish your goals. Make sure to check out the show notes for any information shared, and if this message impacted you, Please share this wisdom with at least one person you care about, and let's grow this movement across the globe. Always remember that the light to success is you, my friend. Until next time.